It was one of those nights when the rain seemed endless. Thick sheets of water lashed against the windows, and the occasional rumble of thunder sent vibrations through the house. I'd been alone since the afternoon, my roommate Danny having gone to visit her parents for the weekend. I didn't mind. I loved the rain. There was something soothing about being wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot tea, and listening to the storm rage outside. I had just settled into the couch with a book when I noticed it. A faint tapping sound, too soft to be the rain and too rhythmic to be a coincidence. I paused, my eyes flicking toward the front door. It came again, a light knock, hesitant and deliberate. I set the book down, my pulse quickening. Nobody should have been outside in weather like this. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table and hesitated for a moment before heading toward the door. "Hello," I called out, my voice tentative. No answer. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw the silhouette of someone standing just beyond the porch light's reach. They weren't moving, just standing there, obscured by the rain and shadows. A chill ran down my spine. "Who's there?" Still no response. The tapping came again, louder this time, but insistent. My fingers tightened around my phone as I considered calling Danny or maybe even the police. But then I thought, maybe they're in trouble. Maybe they need help. Summoning some courage, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The rain immediately blew in, cold and stinging against my face. "Hello," I said, louder this time. The figure stepped forward. It was a man, drenched and disheveled, his face pale and drawn. His eyes darted around nervously, but he didn't speak right away. He looked desperate, almost haunted. "Please," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Can I use your phone? My car broke down." I hesitated. The man's soaked clothes and haggard appearance matched his story, but something about him felt off. His gaze wouldn't quite meet mine, and his hands trembled as he clutched the edges of his jacket. Still, I couldn't just leave him out in the rain. "Stay here," I said, closing the door partway. "I'll grab my phone." When I turned back, I saw the man standing closer to the door than before. He hadn't waited on the porch like I'd asked. My stomach twisted as his gaze met mine for the first time. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and something about them made my skin crawl. "On second thought," I said, trying to sound firm, "maybe you should." A loud crack of thunder drowned out my words, and the power flickered. The porch light went out, plunging the front of the house into darkness. I froze, gripping the door handle as the rain seemed to grow louder, angrier. When the light flickered back on, the man was gone. I slammed the door shut, locking it as fast as my shaking hands could manage. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away, clutching my phone. I dialed Danny, needing to hear a familiar voice. "Hey, what's up?" she answered after a few rings. "There was a guy," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "He knocked on the door. Said he needed help. And then, he just disappeared." "Wait, what?" Danny sounded more confused than concerned. "Are you sure? It's pouring out there. He probably just left when you said no." "Maybe," I said, glancing back at the door. But something about him felt wrong. "Do you want me to call someone?" "The police?" I hesitated. "No, I'll be fine. It's probably nothing." We chatted for a few more minutes before I hung up, trying to calm myself down. But the uneasy feeling lingered. I decided to check the front door again, just to be sure the man was really gone. The rain had let up slightly, giving the streetlights enough clarity to illuminate the yard. It looked empty. No sign of the man, no car stalled at the curb. Just puddles glistening on the pavement. But then I noticed something. Footprints. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the porch to the side of the house. My heart raced as I realized they didn't lead back to the street. They ended at the living room window. I turned to look at the window, half expecting to see him staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was my own pale reflection in the glass. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A crash from the backyard shattered the silence. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled toward the kitchen, where the noise had come from. The back door was wide open, the wind whipping rain into the house. I'd locked it earlier, I was sure of it. The muddy footprints were there too, trailing in from the back porch. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The only response was the storm, loud and relentless. I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a heavy rolling pin from the counter, and edged toward the door. The footprints led out into the yard, disappearing into the darkness. A flicker of movement caught my eye. A shadow, just beyond the tree line. "Get out of here!" I yelled, stepping into the rain. My bare feet sank into the muddy grass as I scanned the yard, my breath coming in ragged bursts. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The shadow moved again, closer this time, just enough for me to make out its shape. It wasn't the men from the porch. This figure was taller, its frame angular and unnatural. Its head cocked to the side in a way that made my stomach lurch, like it was trying to understand me. Lightning lit up the yard for a split second, and I saw its face. It wasn't human. For a split second, as the lightning illuminated the yard, I was paralyzed by what I saw. The figure standing at the edge of the tree line wasn't the men from the porch. Its frame was too tall, its limbs too long and angular, like they'd been stretched unnaturally. But it was the face that haunted me most. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp, skeletal features. The eyes were hollow, deep black pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Its head tilted sharply to one side, as if studying me, its lips pulling back into a jagged, unnatural grin. I stumbled backward, slipping in the mud. The rolling pin fell from my hands as I scrambled to my feet, the cold rain soaking me to the bone. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in the distance, but it didn't move. It just stood there, grinning. A low, guttural sound echoed through the yard, a wet, raspy noise that I realized was coming from its throat. The sound wasn't quite laughter, but it wasn't far from it either. My legs finally obeyed, and I bolted back into the house, slamming the door behind me. The deadbolt clicked into place, but I didn't feel any safer. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed into the kitchen, grabbing my phone from the counter. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. The operator picked up almost immediately. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my yard, I stammered. I don't know what it is, but it's not human. Can you describe it? The operator asked, her tone calm but cautious. It's tall, pale, and it's just standing there, watching me. Please, send someone. Officers are on their way, she assured me. Stay on the line with me. I gripped the phone tightly, my eyes locked on the back door. The muddy footprints I'd followed out into the yard were smeared across the kitchen floor, a stark reminder that whatever was out there had been closer than I wanted to believe. Then the lights flickered. The storm must have hit a transformer, because the power went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of my phone screen. My heart raced as the rain outside seemed to grow louder, the wind rattling the windows like it was trying to get in. Hello. I whispered into the phone. I'm still here, the operator said. Stay calm. Officers should be there in a few minutes. A loud bang came from the living room. I turned, my body frozen with fear. The sound had been sharp, like something heavy had hit the window. Slowly, I edged toward the hallway, clutching the phone like it could somehow protect me. The darkness made every shadow seem alive, every creak of the house a potential threat. Another bang, louder this time, followed by a faint scraping sound. Someone's trying to get in, I whispered. Lock yourself in a room, the operator said firmly. Stay quiet. I darted into the bathroom, locking the door behind me and pressing my back against it. My phone buzzed in my hand, a text message lighting up the screen. It was from an unknown number. Nice try. I stared at the message, my stomach churning. How did they have my number? My breath hitched as a new sound reached my ears, a faint tapping, soft but deliberate, coming from the bathroom window. I turned slowly, the phone's glow illuminating the glass. At first, I saw nothing but rain streaking down the pane. But then the tapping came again, and the figure leaned into view. Its grin was wider now, its hollow eyes staring directly at me. One of its impossibly long fingers pressed against the glass, tracing slow, deliberate circles. I bit back a scream, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone tighter. "Officers are here," the operator said in my ear, her voice grounding me for a moment. "They're at your front door." The figure's head snapped to the side, as if it had heard her. Its grin faded slightly, replaced by something colder, something angry. It stood there for another moment before retreating into the rain, its movements jerky and unnatural. I bolted from the bathroom, flinging the front door open. 2 officers stood on the porch, their rain-soaked uniforms giving me an overwhelming sense of relief. I barely managed to explain what had happened, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They searched the yard and the surrounding area but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone having been there. Even the muddy tracks in my kitchen had somehow disappeared. "It's probably just the storm playing tricks on you," one of the officers said, though his tone lacked conviction. "But we'll have a car patrol the area tonight, just in case." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the image of that thing's face from my mind. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the yard muddy and waterlogged. I stepped outside hesitantly, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. A single, deep scratch carved into the wooden porch railing. It was long and deliberate, as if made by a claw. Beside it, etched into the wood, were 3 words. "See you soon." I've always loved rainy nights. There's something soothing about the sound of water drumming against the windows, the way it muffles the world and makes everything feel smaller, cozier. That night, though, the rain wasn't soothing. It was relentless, a storm so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. It was the kind of rain that felt alive, like it had a purpose. I was alone in the house, something I usually enjoyed. My husband, Tom, was out of town for a work conference, and I'd spent the day curled up with a book, feeling the rare freedom of not answering to anyone else's schedule. By the time night fell, the storm had picked up, and the house felt colder, darker. I turned on more lights than I needed, telling myself it was just to brighten the mood. Around 9 p.m., I heard the first knock. It was faint, almost imperceptible over the rain. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in weather like this. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it, the sound blending with the rhythm of the storm. Then it came again. A soft, deliberate knock. I got up from the couch, my blanket trailing behind me, and crept toward the front door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. The porch light swayed slightly in the wind, casting long shadows on the wet steps, but no one was there. "Hello," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. The only answer was the rain. I opened the door just a crack, the wind immediately pushing against it. Cold droplets splashed against my face as I scanned the empty yard. The street beyond was deserted, the water pooling in the gutters reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights. Shivering, I closed the door and locked it. As I turned back toward the living room, a shiver ran down my spine. Something didn't feel right. I told myself it was the storm, the isolation, but I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I tried to go back to reading, but my eyes kept flicking to the windows, half expecting to see someone standing outside. The rain hammered against the glass, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the yard. I told myself to relax, to stop letting my imagination get the better of me. And then I heard it again. The knock wasn't at the front door this time. It was at the back. The kitchen door faced the backyard, a small space bordered by trees that always seemed too close to the house. I hesitated in the living room, staring down the hallway toward the kitchen. The rain was louder here, almost deafening, but the knock had been clear. Deliberate. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. No answer. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, clutching it tightly as I edged toward the kitchen. The door was locked, and through the small window above the sink, I could just make out the dark shapes of the trees swaying in the wind. I couldn't see the back porch from here, but the thought of opening the door made my stomach twist. I decided to leave it alone. Whoever, or whatever, it was, I wasn't giving them an opening. But as I turned to head back to the living room, I caught sight of something that stopped me cold. Footprints. Wet, muddy footprints on the tile floor. They weren't mine. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the trail. The prints started at the back door, leading deeper into the house. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt a draft. And yet, someone had been inside. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest, they could still be here. My grip tightened on the phone as I backed into the kitchen, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. The house felt too quiet now, the storm muffled by the pounding of my own heartbeat. I heard a creak from upstairs. I froze. The sound was faint, just the whisper of weight on old wood, but it was enough. Someone was upstairs. I bolted for the front door, throwing it open and running into the rain. The cold water soaked through my clothes immediately, the wind whipping my hair into my face as I stumbled down the driveway. I fumbled with my phone, trying to dial 911, but my hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to hit the right buttons. The operator answered, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I gasped, the rain making it hard to hear. I think they're upstairs. Are you safe? She asked. I'm outside, I said, glancing back at the house. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the windows. But they're still in there. Stay on the line, she said. Officers are on their way. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and backed further down the driveway. The rain made it hard to see, but I kept my eyes on the house, watching for any sign of movement. The minutes stretched on, every second feeling like an eternity. And then I saw it. A figure at the upstairs window, silhouetted against the faint glow of the bedroom light. They stood perfectly still, their face obscured by shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me. Watching. My legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot as I stared up at the figure. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw them smile. The lightning lit up the yard for a fraction of a second, but that smile, it burned into my mind as if it lasted forever. Wide, unnatural, and far too deliberate. The figure didn't move. They stood there, framed by the window, their grin almost mocking me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen in place. My grip on the phone tightened as I whispered to the operator, they're at the window. Upstairs. Just staring. Stay where you are, she said, her tone calm but firm. The officers are almost there. Do you see any weapons? Any movement? No, I said, my voice trembling. They're just standing there. Smiling. The rain pounded harder, soaking me to the bone as I took a shaky step back, my eyes never leaving the window. And then, as if they knew I was watching, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, they stepped back into the shadows of the room, disappearing from view. My chest tightened. They're gone. I said, my voice breaking. I don't see them anymore. Stay outside, the operator reassured me. Don't go back in. Officers are pulling up now. The faint wail of sirens cut through the storm, growing louder as a patrol car turned onto my street. I stumbled toward the road, waving my arms to get their attention. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were in the house, I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. I saw footprints in the kitchen, and then they were upstairs, at the window. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them nodded. Stay here, he said. We'll check it out. I watched as they approached the house, their flashlights bouncing off the wet pavement. They entered through the front door, disappearing into the shadows inside. Minutes passed, and the storm seemed to grow louder, the rain deafening as I stood there, waiting. Finally, one of the officers emerged, his expression grim. We didn't find anyone, he said. I blinked, my mind racing. What do you mean? I saw them. There were footprints. They were in the window. The house is clear, he said. No signs of forced entry, no one upstairs. Are you sure? I'm not imagining this. I snapped, the frustration boiling over. Check again. Look for the footprints in the kitchen. The officer nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes, and went back inside. I stood there, shivering in the rain, clutching my arms to stop myself from shaking. The second officer returned a few moments later. There are no footprints, he said. The kitchen floor is dry. I shook my head, backing away. That's not possible. I saw them. I followed them. The first officer stepped closer, his voice softer now. Sometimes storms can play tricks on us. Shadows, reflections, it's easy to misinterpret things when you're alone. I wanted to argue, to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Nothing I said would convince them, and a part of me began to wonder if they were right. Maybe the storm had made me imagine it. Maybe I'd scared myself into seeing things that weren't there. The officers offered to stay for a while, but I declined. Once they left, the house felt hollow, too quiet. I locked every door and window, double-checked the locks, and turned on every light in the house. But even with the warmth of the lamps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to calm down. The storm began to ease, the rain lightening into a soft drizzle. I told myself it was over. That whoever, or whatever, I'd seen was gone. And then I heard it. A soft knock. Gentle, deliberate. From the upstairs window. My blood ran cold. My eyes snapped to the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The knock came again, louder this time, as if to make sure I heard it. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police again, my fingers trembling. The operator picked up, but before I could say anything, the lights flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. The only light came from my phone's screen as I crept toward the stairs, the soft knock continuing above me. My breath hitched with every step, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. I didn't want to go up there, but something pulled me forward, some primal need to confirm what I already knew. The knock stopped as I reached the top of the stairs. The hallway was pitch black, the door to my bedroom slightly ajar. I shone the flashlight from my phone toward the door, the beam catching the edge of the frame. My breath was shallow as I pushed the door open. The room was empty. No one at the window. No muddy footprints. Just the faint sound of the rain against the glass. But then I saw it. On the window pane, written in the condensation, were 3 words. See you soon. I didn't stay in the house that night. I packed a bag, drove to a friend's place, and refused to go back until Tom returned. I never told him the full story, just said I got spooked during the storm. He laughed it off, called me jumpy, and assured me there was nothing to worry about. But sometimes, when it rains, I swear I hear that knock. Soft, deliberate, and waiting for me to answer. Rainstorms had always been my comfort, the kind of weather that made me want to curl up with a good book or binge a true crime series while the world outside got washed clean. That night, though, the storm felt different. It was heavier, angrier, with lightning that lit up the sky in brief, blinding flashes and thunder that seemed to shake the ground. I had been house-sitting for my friend, Claire, who lived a few miles outside of town in a cozy little house surrounded by woods. It was a perfect escape, no neighbors, no traffic, just peace and quiet. Claire had warned me that storms out here could get intense, but I hadn't minded. The thought of being alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the rain for company had seemed idyllic. Until it wasn't. The rain started just after sunset, soft at first but quickly escalating into a torrential downpour. I had settled on the couch with a mug of tea and my laptop, trying to finish up some work, when the power went out. 1 second, the room was bathed in the warm glow of the lamp, the next, I was plunged into darkness. Great, I muttered, fumbling for my phone. The flashlight app cast a weak but reassuring light as I made my way to the kitchen. I remembered Claire mentioning a drawer with candles and matches, though it took me a few tries to find them. Soon, a few flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. I tried to convince myself it was cozy, romantic even. But the truth was, the shadows made the room feel alive, and every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I decided to call Claire, partly to check in but mostly to hear another human voice. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. My stomach tightened. It was probably just the storm messing with the cell towers, I told myself. Nothing to panic about. Then I saw it. Through the kitchen window, past the sheets of rain and swaying trees, a faint light flickered in the woods. It was small and distant, bobbing up and down like someone holding a lantern. My first thought was that it must be a neighbor, though I hadn't seen another house for miles on the drive here. Maybe a hiker. But in this weather. The light disappeared for a moment, and I leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look. When it reappeared, it was closer. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a flashlight, I realized. It had a strange, warm glow, too steady for a flame and too soft for an LED. And it was moving toward the house. I backed away from the window, my pulse quickening. My rational mind tried to offer explanations. Maybe it was a lost camper. Maybe it was a prank. But deep down, I felt the wrongness of it, like a chill that settled in my bones. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The little "no service" message at the top of the screen sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I tried the landline in the kitchen, but it was dead too. I was completely cut off. The rain pounded harder, drowning out every other sound. I grabbed the nearest thing that could be used as a weapon, a heavy metal candlestick, and headed for the living room. From there, I could see the front yard and keep an eye on the woods. Maybe the light would turn back, fade away, and this would all just be a weird story I could laugh about later. But when I peeked through the curtains, the light was already at the edge of the yard. It was closer now, and I could make out more details. It wasn't a lantern or a flashlight, it seemed to hover, its glow pulsing faintly, almost hypnotically. And beneath the light, a figure stood. I couldn't make out their face, just the dark outline of someone tall and still, their head tilted slightly as if they were looking at the house. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. The candlestick felt useless in my hand, a flimsy barrier between me and whoever, or whatever, was out there. My first instinct was to run, but where? The car was parked outside, and there was no way I was going out into the storm. The figure might already be closer than I realized. Then came the knock. It was soft, deliberate, and came from the back door. I froze. The light had been at the front of the house. There was no way anyone could have made it to the back door that quickly. Unless there was more than one of them. The knock came again, louder this time. My hands trembled as I edged toward the door, the candlelight flickering in the draft. I held my breath, listening. The rain drowned out most of the noise, but I could hear something, a faint, rhythmic sound, like breathing. I leaned closer to the door, my ear inches from the wood. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, low and soft, came through the door. "You shouldn't have looked." The candle sputtered out, plunging me into darkness. I stood frozen in the pitch-black kitchen, my breath caught in my throat. The voice, low, soft, and unnervingly calm, echoed in my ears. "You shouldn't have looked." The rain hammered against the roof, and the wind howled, but those sounds felt distant now. All I could hear was the deafening thud of my heartbeat. My hands fumbled for my phone, shaking as I switched on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light illuminated the door, the shadows around it twitching with every flicker. The knock came again, louder this time. It wasn't a polite knock, it was forceful, deliberate, almost angry. The handle rattled slightly as if whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was testing the lock. "You need to leave," the voice said, louder now. It wasn't a demand, it sounded almost like a warning. I backed away, the candlestick clutched in one hand, the phone in the other. My mind raced. If this was a prank, it was an elaborate one. But something about the voice, the way it carried through the storm and seemed to resonate in my chest, told me this was no prank. The pounding stopped. The silence was worse. I stood there for what felt like hours, straining to hear anything over the rain. And then, faintly, I heard footsteps. Not retreating footsteps, circling footsteps. They moved slowly, deliberately, around the house. Whoever was outside wasn't leaving. They were looking for another way in. I bolted into the living room, locking every door and window as I went. My phone buzzed in my hand, and for a split second, I thought it was a notification from Claire or maybe an alert from the authorities. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was a text from an unknown number. Too late. The message was accompanied by a photo, a grainy, rain-soaked image of the house I was in. It was taken from outside, somewhere in the woods. The light from the kitchen window glowed faintly in the background, and in the foreground, there was a figure. Me. The photo showed me standing at the kitchen window earlier, when I'd first spotted the strange light in the woods. My face was pale, my expression tense, completely unaware that someone had been watching. I nearly dropped the phone. My mind reeled. How could they have taken the photo? I'd only been at the window for a few seconds. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a sound that sent chills down my spine, a low, raspy laugh. It came from the porch, just outside the living room window. My flashlight beam flicked toward the curtains, but I couldn't bring myself to move them aside. Instead, I backed away, my feet slipping slightly on the wet footprints I'd tracked in earlier. The laugh came again, followed by a faint tapping on the glass. My phone buzzed once more. Look outside. I shook my head, whispering to myself, don't do it. Don't look. But the curiosity, or maybe the fear, was too strong. I edged toward the window, my hands trembling, and lifted the corner of the curtain just enough to peek out. The rain distorted my view, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing in the yard. They were tall, unnaturally so, their head tilted at an odd angle. And then, with another flash of lightning, I saw their face. It wasn't human. The features were stretched and wrong, as if someone had tried to sculpt a person out of wet clay. The eyes were hollow and dark, reflecting the faint glow of the storm. And the smile, that same wide, unnatural grin I'd seen at the upstairs window, seemed to twist further as they realized I was watching. The figure took a step closer. I stumbled back, dropping the curtain and nearly tripping over the coffee table. My phone buzzed again, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen. The tapping on the window grew louder, more insistent, as if they knew the sound was eating away at me. I ran for the stairs, my bare feet slipping on the wet wood. If they got inside, I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. I slammed the door to the bedroom and shoved a dresser in front of it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house fell silent. No footsteps. No tapping. Just the storm raging outside. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the closet door creaked. My flashlight snapped to the corner of the room. The closet door, which I was sure had been closed, was now slightly ajar. The narrow crack revealed nothing but darkness, but the air in the room felt heavier, suffocating. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The door creaked open a little further. I held my breath, gripping the candlestick like it was my last line of defense. The shadows inside seemed to shift, but I couldn't tell if it was real or my imagination. Then the voice came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have looked." The closet door swung open fully, and the figure from the yard stepped out, their movements slow and deliberate. Their face was even more distorted up close, the smile too wide, the eyes too hollow. They didn't run. They didn't lunge. They just stood there, watching me. The last thing I remember was the flashlight flickering out, plunging the room into darkness. I woke up on the porch, rain pouring down on me, the storm reduced to a light drizzle. The house was quiet, the lights inside flickering faintly as the power returned. I stumbled to my feet, drenched and shivering, my mind a blur. The bedroom window was open, the curtains swaying gently in the breeze. I didn't go back inside. I got in my car and drove until the sun rose, not stopping until I reached Claire's house. I told her everything, but when we returned to check on the house, it was exactly as she'd left it. No muddy footprints. No broken locks. No signs of anyone having been there. But in the upstairs bedroom, written in the condensation on the window, were words. "See you again."